In this tutorial, I want to use one of the new features from SwiftUI 3 that was announced this year, and that is the canvas view. So I can use this for iOS 15 plus macOS, tvOS and watchOS, which means that I can use it actually for all platforms. And this is a nice little view which I can use to draw. I will show you a couple of examples what this is capable of drawing. And the main goal is actually to make a little drawing app. So I have here in the center the canvas, and I can draw with different colors. So this is a custom color picker, but we can also use the from SwiftUI 2. So this is a color picker view. We can use this to draw lines. We can also change the line width of these lines, and we can also draw some shapes. And I can here also remove my last shapes and undo this. And I also have here a delete function. So we're going to have to look at how to draw things, how to create a little model from this, because I actually want to also save my drawing at some point, and also how to do this kind of undo and redo and delete, since we have to do 2 parts, drawing and how to use gestures. So in this case, I'm using a DragGesture. So we have a look at what SwiftUI has available for gestures. Unfortunately, there is one gesture which I want but cannot get. So for example, here I did add a magnification gesture that you can add to this view. But the problem is I cannot control this to the extent that I want to. So we also have a look at some of the limitations, because with this current gestures I can only zoom in the center, simply because I don't know where the user might want to zoom in. And I only have one drag gesture that I can use, and right now I'm using it to draw, so I cannot use it to zoom, to scroll around. Since the canvas view is only available if you use the canvas view for drawing, we will be limited here with the versions. But I tested this with shapes, and they are available from iOS 13, so from the very beginning. So you can also see this with shapes. And this first part, we're going to work on the UI that you see right now. And then later on, we're going to add the saving functionality and also creating multiple documents, showing the documents in the list. But this I'm going to do in a separate tutorial, because now it's already quite a lot to do these drawings and gesture recognition. So let's start. I have here a sample project, a new project, so we can test all these different implementations. And the first thing is, maybe we should have a look at what this canvas actually can do. So I'm just going to create here a new test view. This is a SwiftUI view. This is a drawing example view. You can use the canvas, which has here a couple of initializers. Let's maybe start with the one that is only with the renderer. And you see here the graphics context and the CG size. So this is the context and this is the size. So basically the size is the visible area of this canvas, because the canvas tries to spread out as wide as it wants. This is one of these greedy views, like a color or a geometry reader. Let's draw something. If you want to draw something, you need to talk to the context. So actually this API is very similar to CG context in UIKit, so you won't have a problem if you're used to this. And I can here use draw. For example, I can draw a text, draw something, add. And now I can, for example, say I want to have it in the center, which is the size width divided by 2. And the Y position is at the size.height divided by 2. So you see it here in the center. If I change the canvas frame and restrict it to, let's say, a frame of 300 by 300. I don't need the alignment because it's anyway taking up this whole space. And I'm adding here a border, blue. You see it's really only this area now that is restricted and it's still in the center. Then you can also draw a image. So for example, I can use here a system icon of trash, giving here again the position. So maybe I already know it's at 100 times 100. So it now appears here. You can not only draw system icons, but also images that you have in your assets catalog. Then we can also draw actually lines or paths that, that was the whole point of the drawing app, that we definitely need for the drawing app. So I can tell the context to stroke. So we have here fill or stroke. You can also clip shapes. Maybe we use it in a minute. So stroke, and here you have to give it a path. For example, we can use one of these initializers with a rounded rect of 10, 100, 100, corner radius of 20. I'm just using here some stuff. And you can also here for the shading or for the style use a color or some linear gradients or radial gradients. Maybe I don't overdo it. And we use a linear gradient. So you have to give the colors that you want to use for the gradients. This is just normal gradient. So I use here a gradient between red and blue. And the starting points is 0. And I'm using here the whole size. Let's see how this gradient looks. So it's basically the stroke. It's probably not very readable right now. And I can use here a line width to stroke this figure. So now you see it. It's actually right now I have the gradient from the very top to down here. But I'm only using here 100 by 100. So I can also use these fixed sizes here. So now you see how the whole gradient going over the stroke. So we're going to have to use this path for our drawing app. If you have a look at the Canvas's graphics context, there's more information of what you can do with this. So for example, here you can use this to clip shapes. So we would be able to cut out part of this area with the clip operation. So context.clip. And here you can even give a path that you want to cut out. So I'm just going to use again a rounded rect, because then we can really control what we want to cut out. So you see it. So it's 200 by 200 and corner radius of 20. And now, so the thing is, it really depends now where I place this clip, because the clipping will be applied to everything that comes after. So right now I don't have anything afterwards, but if I add here another context, but this time I'm going to fill it, and I'm going to fill a ellipse in 0, 0, 200, 200 with green. So the reason why you don't see anything is because here the part that I'm cutting out afterwards is larger than or the same size as here my ellipse. So if I'm cutting out here a smaller thing like 100, you see that I have here only half of my ellipse. Maybe I should make this actually an ellipse. So this is a height of 150. So now you really see that I cut out stuff. For example, I can also decide to cut out something more in the center. So I'm moving here my ellipse in one direction to the right, but the clipped area is still here. So that's why I'm clipping this part. This clipping would be applied to everything that comes afterwards, which might be a little bit, sometimes you just want to clip maybe this part and then you want to go back. That's why they have a layer, subcontext. So you get here a context, and whatever you add inside of this sub layer is only applied to this. So if I move this operation, this clipping inside here, and only use the subcontext for this, then only this part would be clipped, and afterwards, after my sublayer, I can normally draw again. So for example, if I again here use this and stroke, so I'm using here basically the same shape. So this is the original one. The one that is now outside of the sublayer doesn't have this clipping. The one that is inside of this sublayer gets it. That's also useful if you, for example, want to do some more different things like adding here a transform. This is a CG affine transform. For example, you can rotate things. This is in pi. And okay, maybe I should have rotated in a different direction or a little bit less, or actually something that makes more sense. Translation. So let's say I'm moving this a little bit around. Now I moved it outside, but you see it's also now moved to 10 points to the right and 10 points upwards. So that's why the lines don't overlap anymore. The one liner that I have outside would be the original one, and the one that is I stroked is moved and also clipped here. Okay, so this is probably enough for this. There's even more stuff to consider with this context, but I'm going to stop here. So we can start by the main task actually of drawing the lines. So I can actually write something on the canvas, which means I'm just going to create a new view. So we can start again and think what we want to have. So this is my drawing view. I'm going to rename the drawing example view to the canvas view. I think this is not the best name, so this is a canvas example view. We still need to have the canvas, at least for the first example, with the context and the size. So in here I would start to draw, but I need to actually know what I'm drawing, so we need to have some kind of points to keep track of. So ideally I would have here a state, a property, private var lines that holds all the line information. Would basically start with CG points, but I already know that I would want to store the color and maybe the line width for each of them. So each line consists of points, the color and the line width. So I'm creating here a new file so where I can put this model in there. Then I can declare the line. So this is a model, so it has to be a struct. This is a line. It definitely needs to have points, so this need to be changeable, so it's var points. And this is a CG point, which means that I have to import here something that actually has points. So I'm importing SwiftUI, CG points. Then I want to have the color, just using the color type, and the line width. This is CG float. So one thing that you can see here, the context works a lot with these CG types, which come from the core graphics, which stands for CG core graphics. So I think this point, color, line width, can't really think of much more right now. So I can go back to my drawing view, and now this lines is actually an array of line type. Start with an empty one. Now that I have my lines, I can start to create a path or draw each of these lines. So each of my line in lines, I need to first create a path from each line. So this is a var path because I want to change it. This is equal to a new path, which is the same as you might use to be with shapes. Then we can say path dot add lines, and you see here I can give it points, CG points, an array of CG points. So I can use my lines points for this, and now I have a path that I can tell my context to draw or to stroke. So I can here give it my path. Then I can tell it here the color, the shading. And I use here my lines color. And I can use my lines line width to draw. So now we still won't see anything because I didn't actually define anything. So just for now, I can, for example, add here an example of just going to create here to test this red one, a line between 2 points, CG points, 100 and 100. So we actually see something. And you see here my little line going from nearly the top to 100 to 100. So this part seems to work. Also it's the right color. And if we change here the line width, so if I change this to blue and a thicker line, you can see it reflects the correct values on the canvas. Now that I have the basics for my drawing, I will need to start using a gesture to know where to draw. So the one that makes the most sense is a drag gesture. So we can add here, after to the canvas, a gesture. So I wanted to use a drag gesture with a minimum distance of 0 because I want to directly start using this. I don't need to specify the coordinate space, and the default one is local, which is anyway what I want. Otherwise you can also save yourself some time for coordinate transformations if you know that you want to have it in the coordinate space of something else that you don't add it to. Okay, now I have here my gesture, but actually I want to know when this changed, so I can use one of these view modifier gesture modifiers, which is gesture trackers, which is unchanged or unended, but this is only triggered once at the end, and I want to also see where it's in between. So unchanged, I get here the value of the gesture. So this is the location. Let's just have a look what it gives. It's the location. This is the CG point. This is probably what I want. So this is my new point that I wanted to anyway keep, but just for you can also use the predicted end location, predicted end translation. So this is the translation is the difference from the starting point to the end point, because it's actually a drag gesture. So I guess most people would prefer to know how much it moves and in which direction it moved, but I care more about the location. So I'm actually not using it probably in the intended way, but anyway, I have the location, I have the predicted end location. This is especially interesting if you want to make your drawing more reactive. Otherwise you might have a certain lag that the line appears always a little bit behind your pencil. So you can also use the predicted end location, but I'm just going for the location. You have also the time here when this happened. So basically we could also store this and then use this to animate this, to recreate the whole drawing. So you could draw this once and then in an infinite loop see this drawing coming again. One of the problems with this drag gesture is that I don't know if it's a finger or a pencil. Since I want to have a drawing app, I would actually like to have only pencil interactions, but I don't have any access to this, which is one of the limitations. I have now a point that I wanted to add to my lines, and I'm not really sure if I started a new line or because it's always called in between. So one thing that we can use is actually this translation to see if is there somewhere in between. So if my values translation width plus my values translation dot height is equal to 0, this means it's the first point, because from one point to the same point is always 0. So I can now create a new point, a new line, and add this to my lines. This is a new line, and I'm directly here giving it my new point with the color, which we haven't yet set. So I'm just going to add here a to do, use selected color and line width, because it also didn't have anything yet to change this. So maybe we put this to 5 so we actually see this. So I'm creating here a new line, and else if the translation is larger, then I'm guessing I'm just adding it to the already existing lines. So now I need to add this to my last line. So this is at the index in my array lines.count -1. And then I can add this at this, then I take the line at this index, and I want this line's points, I want to append this new point. So let's try. If you run this in live preview, we see some lines, and it's also not that smooth. That's one thing we need to take care of. But maybe we start by actually being able to select the color and the line width. So I need to first have here two properties that I want to change over time. So it needs to be a state property, and state private var selected color. This is a color, and I'm starting here with black, and then a add state private var selected line width. This is CG float. So now we have to decide where we want to place this. Just going to place this on the top. This is more user experience improvement. So I'm putting everything in the VStack for now. I can use the color picker, line color, and I can bind this here to my selected color. So it now appears up here. For the line width, a slider would be probably good enough. So this is a slider. Now we have to check what initializer to use. So I guess I want to limit this because it shouldn't be too big. So I'm binding this to my selected line width, and I have to give you a closed range. So for example, I can use 1 to 10. line width. So now I can change this here. And the range is right now from 0 to 10. Maybe 0 is not really useful. So I'm going to use 1 to 20. Now I just set it, but I'm not using it currently for my lines. So we need to change that where I just used hardcoded values before, which was here creating a new line. So I'm here using the selected color and the selected line width. So I probably should go for something. And you see we have the right color. Changing the color and making this really thin again. So we have now these two nice customizations of our drawing. Maybe we should format this a little bit nicer here. So I'm going to put my color picker and my slider in an H stack. So they're next to each other, and maybe we are adding some padding. And the thing is here, this color, I'm not really sure if I want to have so much spacing in between. And if I actually need the label, so I can label is hidden, hide the label of my line width, of my color. And maybe we make this slider a little bit, we limit the size with a maximum width of 200. This is, I probably have to test. And adding here a text to show the selected, because it has otherwise too many numbers after the comma. I'm using here a formatter, so you can tell it how many numbers after the comma you want to see, and right now I put here 2, but I guess in this case I really don't need this. So if I increase this, you see this number is changing to the maximum of 20, which I set here. So now that we have this first one, I want to work on improving my lines, and maybe also here removing the lines that I had in the beginning, the dummy one. So I'm just going to change the lines property here. So one of the things that we need to take care of is getting these lines more smooth. And there's one algorithm that is fairly simple enough, which is to use a quad curve, calculating the midpoints, and then using this. So I'm going to show you this, how to calculate this first. I'm going to put this, creating this different path in a different file, so we can use it, reuse it at other occasions. I mean, for using it for the shapes, for example. So this is my drawing engine. I need SwiftUI because I want to work with paths. So this is a class, drawing engine. So the first thing I need is a way of calculating the midpoint between 2 points. You see here one example implementation. So I have here 2 points as the argument. And I create a midpoint by taking the x positions of both and calculating the in-between, and taking the y position of this and taking the in-between, and that's my new midpoint. Now we can write a function to create a path. So this is function create path for points. This is an array of CG points which returns a path. So I start by having an empty path. Path is equal to new path. Now I need to go first to my first position. So this is if let first point is points.first, because I'm not really sure if this is called with an empty array. If this has a point, I'm going to move my path to this first point. So from there on, then we can start to draw. This is the path that I'm returning in this function. Then I need to use all the points in between to add this quad curves. So for index, because I don't want to use all of them, I'm using the index in 1 until my points.count. So this is the last index in my array. I'm first calculating the midpoint for my points at this index, -1. So this is the previous one, for example, the last one, and then to the one that comes after. So this is at points.index, because the operation I actually want to use is this add quad curve, and to point with this control point. So the control point is actually my point at this index, and the point that I'm drawing towards is my midpoint. You will see this in a minute when I show you the lines. And then for the last one, because I didn't draw fully to the last, because I only went here for the last midpoints. Points.last. I'm again using just the path.addLine. Add line, not add lines, to my last point. So now I have all of them. And in my drawing view, I did here previously in the canvas for each of these lines, just use the path. I created here the new path and added this line. So now we can instead use the drawing engine's functions. So this is my engine. There's only functions in there, so you don't need to use any of these state properties. So instead of this here, I'm telling my engine to create a path for my line.points. This cannot be a let. And then you can see the difference. So you see here this spikes. This is because I have not taken care of the styling of this stroke. I have to change the way we stroke our path. So there is a different one. Stroke with style. So it's the same path. I'm using the same color. And now here I have the possibility to define the stroke style. So in this case, I'm doing my lines line width. I'm using here round, so it doesn't cut it off. And I'm not using meter, which is I think the default. I'm using round. Then there's also the dash, for example. You can make dashed lines. Probably shouldn't do this. The face is just the offset. This is more interesting if you want to actually have animation of a drawing line. So this is this marching ends effect. If you add and actually, in order to make this work. Okay, so before I can do this, I have to here uncomment my other line. So now you see here, actually the point was not the dashed lines. This is here because I set this. I'm going to just take out these parts. But now you see that this is also very easy to adjust. And the difference is here this end lines or this line caps, line joins is now here round. So it doesn't have these spikes anymore. So this was one problem. And it's now fairly smooth. What I'm going to do to demonstrate this a little bit better is I'm going to add some markers where we have collected the points. So I want to draw just a small rectangle for each of the points that we collected. I have to again loop over my points in my line that are in my line's point array. And for each of these I want to draw. And I'm just going to use here an image at this point. I'm using here system image. This is not really for the main application, it's just for us to know what this is doing. So now you see all these lines. I didn't specify anything about this image, so that's why it's still black. Need to go to a very thin one. So maybe I'm using a different one. Not a cross, a plus. And actually I would like to also have, since I'm drawing here, testing so much, maybe a delete button. So just here next to my settings, I'm going to add a button. So the action is that I want to reset all of my lines. So I'm just going to set here this array to 0 again. And then adding here delete and a foreground color of red. So now I can delete all of them again. When I tested this just on my device, I realized I did make here a mistake with the quad curve. I'm adding a curve to the new midpoint and the control point is the previous point. So I'm just going to show you a graphic that makes this more clear. The gray points here are actually the points that are on our line. And I always had to here calculate this new midpoint. We started with our first point, moved it to the first point. Then for the next index, Then in order to draw this line to the next point, which is this new midpoint, I have to calculate the midpoint between this preceding two new points, which means that I have here the control point is always this last point, and the midpoint is the new midpoint here that I calculate between these 2 points. With this kind of algorithm, you get very smooth lines, and this is even more visible if you try it on device. So this is from my iPad when I used it with the pencil. So I just made this really small from the line width and a gray color of the line. So you see here the crosses for all of the points. And in some cases you really see these points are not on the line anymore. This is because I'm using this as control points. So it's just deviating the line a little bit. Most of the time you won't see it, only if it's like sharp corners. So for example, here you see in this area it's a little bit visible that this is similar to here, the situation, this edge. If I use this, I have here more points because I'm going slower. So it tracks the points in a certain time interval. So if I make a really fast line, I have less points. You can also optimize this further and check what these lines are. There's more algorithms of fixing this. But for now, it's quite precise if you try it. Now we have here our nice smooth lines. We can change the line color, and create new lines. And I can also delete this. The last thing is maybe that we want to add these undo and redo. So first in my drawing, I'm going to take out these helper points here with this plus. So we can concentrate on the main application. And I want to have here this undo and redo. So maybe I put this before my delete. So I want to have 2 buttons. And one is, I'm using here system icons. This is the arrow U-turn backward circle, and then the arrow U-turn forward circle. I can also increase the image scale to large to have here 2 larger icons. And now we need to decide what to do when I press back. When I press backwards, I want to remove the last line. I could say my lines remove last. But I actually only should do this if I actually have a line. So I'm going to disable this button if my lines count is 0. So now I can press here backward. And I can delete this, and you could also see that if in some cases I do have here actually too many lines. This is because I am creating here quite a few lines every time with this, because of this, the way I create new lines. They're just simply empty. And the way I'm fixing this is with the onEnded. I'm going to check if my line actually has something. So my lines.last points. And if these points are empty, then I'm going to remove this line. So now I can make sure that I don't store empty lines anymore. So let's see. So we can go back, and if I don't have any more lines, it's grayed out, or so it's disabled the button, which is good. But now what I do if I want to put them back in, I need to change our little implementation, because right now I just removed the last. I need to keep it. And if you do this operation, it actually returns the last line. Let last. So you get here the last line back, which means I need to store them somewhere. Similar to my lines property, I have to have another state property. This is deleted lines. This is an array of lines. So when I press here on delete, I'm going to add this to my deleted lines, so that when I press on redo, I'm going to append this. I have to first take this line again. This time it's basically the opposite. Deleted lines, the last one. I'm removing the last one from my deleted one because I want to again append it to my actual lines. This is probably a very simple implementation. So I draw here a couple of lines. I go back and I can do them again. And also we need to make sure that, because I'm here, I only should do this if I actually have a line. So again, I'm disabling this button. Disable if my deleted lines count is 0. So now in the beginning I don't have any lines, so both of these buttons are disabled. I draw, I undo, and now I have a line that I can redo. Maybe. And this is also working. If I press here on delete, I still have some in my undo. So we have to decide of how to do this. If I press on delete, I'm probably also going to remove all my deleted lines. So this is a very destructive action, which you might want to ask the user if he really wants to do this. So we can use the confirmation dialog. This is new. So I can use here with text a title. So this is, are you sure you want to delete everything? Then it needs to have another binding. So this is a state private var show confirmation. This is a boolean value. And in the beginning I don't want to show this, so it's false. So now I have this to bind this to. And in the action, I'm going to delete everything once this is confirmed. So I'm moving here my lines, erasing there. And if I press on delete, I want to show this confirmation dialog. So then I have to change this property here to true. The show confirmation is true. And actually it does not take what it presents. Is you can add here some views. So I'm adding here a button. In this case, I can also use one of these roles just to see. Delete. This is a destructive button. And if the user presses on this button, so I need to just draw something, I press on delete and it shows it down here. So I can say I'm canceling this or I'm really deleting it. To wrap things up, we made this very simple drawing app where I can draw on the canvas. I did use here a couple of things that are only available for the newer SwiftUI 3, including the canvas, or here this confirmation dialog that you can easily redo with a popover or alert. If you want to change and not use a canvas, but something that works with a lower iOS version, we can fall back to shapes. So in this case, I wouldn't use here this canvas. So I'm going to comment this here out. So I need to use here I need to define an area to draw on. So I'm using a white color, just to spread all everywhere. So now to this color we attach this gesture, and then in here I would add and show my lines. So for each of my lines, so in order to work with for each, I'm making my line here identifiable, and I'm adding here an ID, let ID. This is a UUID. So now here for each of my lines, I want to create a shape, and to make this a little bit easier, I'm not going to draw it in here. I'm going to create another extra file for my shape type. So this is the SwiftUI view. This is a drawing shape. So since it's a shape, it needs to conform to shape, which means that I have here a path function that I have to do something. So this is, again, you see here it wants a path. So I have my points. This is an array of points, CG points, and I need to construct a path, but I already had this in my drawing engine. So I'm just going to use this again to create my path. So my engine, create path for points. So now here in my for each, I can use one of my drawing shapes and give it the lines points. And again, I have to stroke this here with a style. So I'm going to use the same as before. So this is this styling here. So this is my lines color I wanted to use, and the styling is the same as we had. So if I run this, I can still draw with this and change the color of the lines and undo and redo and delete. In this example, it's probably not necessary to really go for the canvas, but it's probably easier if you want to have some more complex drawings to just say, yeah, stroke this here, stroke this there, color this like this. It's much easier to define in code than with these shapes. In case you want to include some images, for example, in your onboarding, then it's probably quite nice to use the canvas, especially in the combination with the timeline to do animations. But in this case, it's just a nice example to try to use some of the newer features. I am guessing, because this is anyway based on UIKit under the hood, that the shapes use CA shape layers, so CA layers for core animation layers. And the context here, this is similar to having a custom UI view where you use the drawing functions, like touches begin, touches ended, and then the draw rect with the context, draw in rect. I'm going to stop here, but there's a couple of things that you can try to implement. For example, you can also include a erasing function. Right now I only can here delete the last one, but if you have a little eraser, change then to the eraser style and track the movements, but not draw at this point. So instead of here doing this on changed with this dragging, you would track if you draw over an already existing line or if you're erased over an existing line, check in the lines array and then remove this specific line. So that's also possible. Or you can have a selector tool where you draw the selected area. So this was the example here. I already deleted this with this dashed lines, for example. You can draw the selected line with this dashed face, with this dash, and then calculate which lines are inside and then draw these lines a little bit differently so they are selected. Then you can add some drag gestures to these ones differently. It's going to get a lot more complicated. If you want to progress in this direction, you can play a lot more with it. My main limitations for this is that I don't have here access to the pencil, if it's a pencil or not. And I don't have a 2-finger drag gesture, a scrolling gesture, which is 2-finger scrolling. It's kind of, I can only drag with 1 finger. And that's a bit annoying because I want to zoom in and then drag around with 2 fingers, but I don't have this gesture. If you have a drawing, you probably want to zoom in and then see more details and then move around. But I don't have the gesture, so you cannot implement this because they don't allow me to customize this drag gesture here more. Or at least I couldn't find it. If you only want to have the drawing area, a simple drawing area, just draw here, then it's good enough. In the next part of this little application, we're going to save the data. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like. See you next time. Happy coding.